Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Bible study. Today is Saturday, December 9th, 2017. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And today our moderator is Betty from California.
Good morning. I'll start off with the quote. With the reading of her textbook, Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures, Mrs. Eddy insisted that her students make, every day, a prayerful study of the Bible and obtain a spiritual understanding of its promises. That's from the annual meeting 1906 in Miscellany by Mary Baker Eddy, page 48.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We trust everyone is doing that here.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes, if there are no other comments.
Okay. The topic, what you see, you get. The Bible readings were from Genesis 15, 16, Genesis 17, and Genesis 21. First question, why did Sarai give Hagar to Abram to be his wife?
I think at the time of that period of time in history was kind of shameful for a woman not to have children and many children, and so I think she did it because she felt maybe a shame or that maybe somehow was her fault as usual. You know, that time it was the woman's fault; it was never the man's fault. So I think she it was done out of, he needed to have and she didn't want to wait for God's promise. That's what also was a factor there. She, I guess she didn't believe when God told Abraham that he was going to be blessed with a lot of descendants, and she just rushed.
Thank you.
Yeah, she was barren, and she didn't want Abram to be without an heir. Who knows what else was going on at the time. But she was quite forlorn about her condition.
This is like 10 years after last week's Bible study.
It is amazing, I have to say. I maybe hadn't seen it so clearly as this time to see how these lessons are building on each other. Right. And 10 years later.
So it's 20 years after he met up with Melchizedek, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And demonstrated great ability of being faithful. But here there were a few little flip-flops. I mean, God had promised them a child. And Abraham's responsible here, too. He could have said, no, let's wait. But instead he jumped into bed with Hagar. Where did Hagar come from?
Egypt.
Yes, and what were they doing in Egypt? They believe they got her when they were in Egypt, right?
Right. But when they went down there for food because of the famine?
Yes.
And then Abraham say that his wife was his sister or something like that?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I mean,
Well, he thought he had to do that to protect them.
Yeah.
So.
And I read, and maybe people don't actually know, but I read that Hagar was the daughter of an Egyptian king who was killed. So she was actually a princess. And then she was captured and taken as a slave by the Pharaoh. And later, because of her royal blood, she was made mistress of all the female slaves and given access to all of Pharaoh's wealth. So she was favored somewhat there, and then Pharaoh gave her to Sarai. and she was Sarah's
handmaid.
Yes, very trusted. And there was a common practice at that time. It wasn't unusual for that kind of thing to happen. But if Sarah had more faith, and Abraham too, could have waited, couldn't they?
Matthew Henry said that this would have been happily prevented if we would ask counsel of God by the word and by prayer.
Yes.
And trust him.
Trust, obedience, timing. That, you know, when you get impatient, you want to meet somebody, and you're impatient about it, and so you're going to go for the first person that walks by your door. It can cause a lot of difficulties. Instead of waiting for the right person, the one that God has for you. And there are many other illustrations when you push and you don't wait on God. We've talked about waiting on God. Sometimes that takes a lot of patience. 10 years is a long time, especially when you were as old as they are.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that age tripped them up.
Yeah.
But I think there's a bigger underlying factor here, which is the law versus the gospel, because the custom was that inheritance and the care of the parents was done by sons, not daughters. So if there was equal rights, there wouldn't have been, okay, they didn't have a child, period, but it was that whole issue of being taken care of in older age, and then the side issue is that they always needed a son, which still is in a lot of countries in the world today, where daughters aren't valued.
Well, and the son has more rights than the mother under that law as well, right?
Yeah, I was glad that the verses from chapter 15 were included. That talked about that steward of the house and that he wouldn't be the heir and all that stuff. Yeah. That was a good preamble to this.
And that was when they got the promise that, you know, this promised son is coming. And then there was even another time when some men came to visit him and said to Abram, you know, you're going to have this son. And Sarah was inside the tent listening. She kind of laughed it off like, you got to be kidding. But,
yeah, because she had already passed through menopause.
It's a test of faith. I mean, this is difficult. How many years? Just like.
Yeah, according to Google, it was impossible.
Yeah.
It's an impossible thing. So she jumped the gun.
This whole part here reminded me of all the times, you know, being married and a spouse asking you to do something that you don't want to do, but you do it anyway. I just kept thinking of that. Like, I don't miss that.
yeah, it was Adam and Eve too.
Yeah.
I also feel that this has taught me a big lesson recently to really, what is my fidelity? Am I really waiting on God, or am I jumping the gun? And I've said, you know what, I think I could do a better job here. You know, if Abram waited and he was, you know, his fidelity was intact, and maybe they made a couple of, you know, bumps along the way, but that's asking so much to trust God, and they did, really. I mean, they humanly tried some different tactics that didn't work out so well, but it does teach me to really trust God, you know. So it was a good lesson for me with this.
Well, and that should be the lesson.
Yeah.
All of us. I mean, we know the results. They didn't know the results, but we know that she ended up having a child, a promise. But it's the fate, and 10 years is a long time. So people who complain, oh, how long, Lord, because they've been in a difficult situation for a year, 2 years. Remember this. Wait on God. The promises will be fulfilled. Sometimes we get tested.
No, in Mrs. Eddy's writing, she says the disobedient make their moves before God.
Thank you, yep.
Or wait too late, either before or after.
Yes, I was reading that too. And then somewhere else on Unauthorized where she was saying timing is most important. The right thing done at the wrong time is still, it's the wrong thing.
I think this is why we have to go through life remembering that life is eternal. I mean, we have forever to work these things out. When you think about that, 10 years isn't so long after all.
Yeah.
No, and also not to accept all the beliefs of age. Because look at what all these prophets did, and, living to be past 100. We don't accept the beliefs that we're limited and not going to do just because of our years on this earth. It's as much as you make it to be. You get better with the years, not worse. Yes.
Yeah, we should.
I've recommended to many people to study and listen to Mrs. Eddy's article. It's called Age. It's just a fairly short thing, but she starts out with that. Experience. We should become better, yes. And it would be so if we know it and work to demonstrate it and not give in to the claims of age. And we need to do this. Doesn't matter. We were taught here, you start early on, because those claims of age will start to bug you early on unless you're handling them.
I like to think of the timeline like a line segment in this sphere. And, when you start thinking of that timeline, that human birth, growth, maturity, age, and try to get your thinking back to the sphere of infinite, ideas, and that's who we are, reflections of infinite ideas, and stop trying to work or figure out the timeline problems and get our mind focused back to God and His ideas.
I like what has been said here for I am forever. That, I think, it's a simple one to use with the age thing.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Good.
Thank you.
Very good.
And I had mentioned in the Eustace, we had gotten the Eustace Foundation and were given many books and in boxes of books and other things. And in there was an article from the Herald Tribune. I think it was written in the 40s. And the name of it was Time is Not Toxic. And it was where the doctors were saying that there is absolutely medical proof that we don't get older. Our cells are constantly renewing themselves. Every 7 years, we're supposed to have a totally new body. I mean, we are remarkable, even on a human level. We are remarkable. And they said there is no reason for anyone to grow old, but it's belief. You think it's going to happen, and it will. And that was medical research. And do we ever hear much of that anymore? No. There was that one article in the Herald Tribune. Time is not toxic. We make it so. By our fears, our negativity, our hatred, that's what makes it toxic.
And the woman who wrote the book, Dying to Be Me, That was the point of her book.
Was the point of her book. Yes. She passed on to the belief of a dread disease and came back to tell everybody it tain't so, honey. It hadn't killed her. Her beliefs, her fears, her anxieties, her negativity, that's what seemed to have killed her, but not disease. And the doctors, when she came back, they couldn't find any disease. It was gone. There was no sense of it, no proof of it. And all that is medically researched. For the doubting Thomases who need to have the medical research done.
What was the name of that book again?
Dying to be Me.
Dying to be Me.
Okay, Betty, did you want to add more? Anyone?
One thing I got from this story, you know, from the human standpoint, it was impossible to have another kid, but she did. For me, that's biblical proof that God is the father of man. And here's one instance of that fact. It just also confirms what Jesus told us. What's impossible with man is possible with God.
Yes. It would seem like, you know, there are many examples in the Bible. Hannah was barren. Who else? There were a few others.
Well, there were several generations after Abram where barren wives gave birth to the most spiritually minded person of the time. Isaac's wife, don't remember her name, but
John the Baptist's parents.
Right.
Elizabeth.
I think it was Rachel.
Yeah, Rachel. Thank you. Yeah, gave birth to a son who carried the torch. And then his wife was barren. I mean, it's several. It's all over in here.
And Samuel was son of
Yeah, he was Hannah's son.
Hannah's son.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if they were barren or if this wasn't time yet.
Well, that's the point,
yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
They had to be of the right mind. They had to have enough faith in God. They had to be ready to put all their trust in God because nothing else would work. And when they were ready, then they were ready to give birth to a child whom they would teach to have the same faith in God.
You know, it was interesting. Last week we were greatly blessed. We had 4 visitors. One had been calling me for help. She's from India. She was there with her husband visiting her daughter and her husband and her daughter, Nina, is about to have a baby any day. I think she has by now anyway. But Nina said that it was a child of promise, that they had tried for 12 years to have a child. And now she was having her first child. And they were very spiritually minded, all 4 of them. Great blessing to have them here.
That's really remarkable these days because people would try the different things available now.
That's
In vitro, surrogate, this and that. So.
Exactly right. But she didn't. She had faith in God. And you could see it in her face and in all their faces. Their faces were glowing. They were very spiritually minded. Wonderful. And I think they will do great things with the science that they're learning here.
It's interesting.
Fairly?
Oh, I was just thinking, when Mary had Jesus, that was totally different.
It was.
Like the combination.
Who was that? Tom?
Now that was me. I was going to say there was an interesting comment in Matthew Henry that said that there seems a lot that the spiritually minded have less kids or done very late or not at all. And seems like the less spiritually minded seem to have a lot of kids. Trying to paraphrase.
That was Matthew Henry. That was interesting.
Right.
Well, I mean, we were taught here just to bring another mortal into this earth. It isn't, that great a thing. It is much better if you have the prayer that goes on before, during, and after. Anytime a child comes to this earth, it's highly important. Mrs. Eddy does say that children of spiritually minded parents talks about that. And those who are not, sometimes they can have a spiritually minded child who doesn't do well because of the grossness of their parents. She also talks about it's much more important, the raising of children is more important than raising of your crops and your businesses. It never should be treated lightly, and certainly in science. You need to know that God is the father and mother of all, not just this reproducing for the sake of reproducing. It's in Science and Health.
Well, I like that a lot. That really gives the spiritual to what was said in the spiritual explanation to what was said in Matthew Henry. So thank you very much for that.
Shall we
Sure.
go on? Number 2, when Sarai saw that Hagar had conceived, Sarai told Abram, I was despised in her eyes. That was Genesis 16:4. And the question is, was she?
Well, I read that, yes, that she was. Hagar decided that she was more favored by heaven, better beloved by Abram, and she would not submit as she had done as a maid.
Well, this is an interesting question because this is Sarai telling what she thinks she sees. Why does she believe that this is what she sees?
I think it was her own insecurities that made her project that kind of behavior onto Hagar. She thought, well, she got pregnant, I didn't, and so she had that kind of insecurity.
There's a lot of truth to that, and that is personal sense.
I mean, the belief at that time is you're scorned if you don't have if you're barren. So that's the starting point. You have that belief anyway. So whether Hagar was despising you or not, you were going to see it, be it Hagar or another person.
And actually, Hagar might have been. I mean, I read where she probably was. She felt a little superior that she got pregnant. And who did she get pregnant with? Abraham, my goodness. Her master.
It goes with the same thing, the belief at that time, I'm better than you because I can have babies, you can't.
Exactly.
So the whole thing is based on either way, whatever the beliefs were.
Yeah, that was the prevalent belief, and prevalent beliefs become as law.
Yeah.
Humanly, if enough people believe them strongly enough.
Yeah, and I mean, Betty named this what you see, you get.
Yes.
she certainly didn't help heal the situation. If that was going on, she could have seen Hagar correctly and said, no, she despises me. And frankly, I'm sure Sarah, in a way, was despising herself for her failure. Usually when you're despising yourself, you end up despising others.
I think others are despising you.
Yes, that's right. It goes all around like that.
Yeah, we project what's in our own consciousness.
Just goes to show that the evil is impersonal.
Right.
You're harboring it. You see it in others, but you don't realize that what you're seeing is what you projected from your own thought.
You can't offer somebody up as a replacement and then be surprised when they replace you either.
That's the irony of this.
She had made this mistake in the first place, and it worked as she expected it to work.
And then she was upset over it. And really, I think, she was probably upset because she hadn't obeyed God or consulted God or listened to God. She went into the human mind and dealt with it in a human manner.
I think this is just a wonderful question, and I like the quote that was used for the Bible study today. To make every day a prayerful study of the Bible and obtain the spiritual understanding of its promises. So it's so easy to look at this. Because in our discussions, we're talking about from what Hagar might be thinking and what Sarah might be thinking, and if you don't think this through, we wouldn't be having these discussions. We were just talking about, I think Hagar. She's now elevated in her thoughts and blah 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 and everything. Everything's all about Hagar, but we're looking at this saying, well, okay, we look at how Hagar's thinking about this, but also how is Sarah thinking about this, and how does this relate to our lives? Anyway, so I love this quote.
When Hagar was sent back after she ran away the first time, the angel did tell her to submit. So that's a little clue that what might have been going on.
Mm-hmm. That's a good
point.
Also,
I think the angel referred to her as Sarah's handmaid and tried to humble her a little bit. Because maybe she was starting to think that she should be the first wife or the more important wife. And again, maybe that came from her being, as Mary Beth mentioned, a princess when she was in Egypt. And maybe she thought, well, this is the way it's supposed to be. Maybe she was thinking she should be have a son who would be father of many nations, or, the heir. So, yeah.
Then Sarai.
Go ahead, Tom.
Then Sarai also turned on Abram about it.
Yeah. Sarai complained to Abraham. Things were working out the way she hoped. She was having to deal with a lot of jealousy and all kinds of things because of her action.
And now she had this little princess.
Right.
I would like to share something that I heard this morning, or link to the Daily Thought, was the primary class talk that they wrote in Miscellaneous Writings, Mrs. Eddy teaching her class. And she says in one part of it, quote, "The doors that this animal element flings open are those of rivalry, jealousy, envy, revenge. It is the self-asserting mortal willpower that you must guard against. But I find this also another mental condition of yours that fills me with joy.
I learned long ago that the world could neither deprive me of something nor give me anything, and that I have now one ambition and one joy. But if one cherishes ambition unwisely, one will be chastened for it. End quote.
Very
yes.
good.
And you should put that on the forum, please, Linda.
Okay. Write it on your forehead.
Yeah, definitely.
That is what the human will, human planning does. You start competing, get jealous, envy, rivalry, competition. Shows you're in the wrong mind. There's no end to it.
I like that. The world can't take anything from me or give me anything.
Yes. Has nothing to offer.
Anyway, for me, this also had another lesson that I thought was pretty helpful, because examining what goes on in the thinking, it's common, I think, for silently in your mind, do you say, I'm thinking that you're thinking, and whatever it is you've dreamed up.
Right.
But it never comes out, and the whole thing can be avoided if it can just come to light. I'm not saying I'm the best at this, but I have done it at times and straightened out a lot of things that would have gone underground and caused more problems. Instead, just bring it out in the open. When it's resolved, you get on with what you have to do.
Anybody else?
I think it's the way evil works, like Eustace talks about in in miscellaneous writings about ways that are vain too. You know, it starts off like, oh, maybe they are thinking this about me and they are thinking that about me. It's all that impersonal error going on and creating trouble.
That is wonderful. Thank you. Ways that are vain. If you haven't read it and don't know it, you should. That's exactly how evil works. And it especially works, that's why, we were taught here that the loner thought, not to get off by yourself, because you start listening to that voice, oh, she doesn't like me, this one is this, and that one is this. Start listening to these voices, and pretty soon you're taken over. And it's not God, and it's not God speaking, and you're wrong about thinking that other people aren't probably thinking about you at all. They got their own problems to think about. Get over yourself, as they say. But that was an article we were taught to study often. Thank you very much, Florence. Excellent point here.
Another item that came from Matthew Henry, which actually correlates with the rule for motives and act, was that it's very easy to get distracted on the wrong course by somebody that's close to you. So the point was that you always have to look at what's the motive for what you're going to do. Does it come from God, or is it a personal thing? And that's what none of them did. And I recognize that that's what I do a lot too, is just make a misjudgment on where is the motive coming from.
Yeah, that's what Jeremy was talking about, just to listen to what your wife tells you and do it blindly. And that's why we start the day with rule for motives and acts. Very important why you do what you do. I mean, if Sarah didn't know better, Abraham probably should have known better. But he just succumbed to her suggestion, and now they were in a big kind of a mess, at least for the moment.
And also, just in the bounds of these readings, I don't know if something else happened in between, but, you see Abram talking to God, then you see Hagar talking to God, but you don't see Sarai talking
Exactly.
to God.
That's very true. I did get the feeling here that Sarai wasn't a more spiritual one, in a way. You didn't see that.
She needs to be chastened.
Yeah, she did, and she was. She didn't take it too well. And I mean, honestly, was any of this Hagar's fault? I mean, what did Hagar? It wasn't.
Wasn't there something about Sarai felt that when the child was born by Hagar, that because of her position, she was the actual wife of Abram, that the child would be hers and Hagar would still be the maid. So she was using her.
Probably right there. Yeah.
Surrogate, that's all.
Like a surrogate.
Surrogate,
Yeah.
surrogate mother, which does go on these days as well.
Anyway, it was kind of a mess.
Yeah, it was a mess. It was a lot of disobedience and a lack of faith, a lack of timing, and created kind of a mess. Everybody was mad at everybody else.
Yeah, well, Sarah, that was not so kind of Sarah, too, though. Hagar, as far as I see in the writings, she was beautiful, too. So you say, Abraham, here, take her. I mean, what do you expect? I mean.
I know. Abraham seemed only too glad.
Yeah, I think it's, you know.
Could be interesting.
I know. What could she expect?
Yeah.
Maybe she regretted her desperate human solutions to this problem.
Right.
And
yes.
you know, I mean, when you think about it, this is a kind of a soap opera, and you know, the human mind loves this kind of complicated story, and to talk about it forever and ever and ever. Whereas going to God is so much simpler and more pure and easy in the end. But the human mind will always choose to ruminate in the intrigue and the. So I that's why I don't like to read novels.
Absolutely, that's total garbage. But here,
Yeah, we could make a good TV series out of this.
here there should be lessons for us. It's not a.
Yeah.
Should be lessons.
And there are beautiful lessons.
Yes, there are. So shall we go on?
Yeah.
I was just thinking that. Number 3. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Genesis 21:9. Was he?
I think she was getting a little paranoid by then. She was seeing everybody mocking her, or everybody making fun of her, everybody. Yeah, she was getting a little.
Yeah, poor Sarah. Yeah, no, she's feeling pretty bad about everything.
Yeah, yeah. She's getting her lesson.
We disobey God as all, and then here it comes.
Yeah.
Another thing I see going on here, Sarah is like blaming others for her discontent. She saw the son mocking. Well, she was discontented because of her own disobedience, but it's convenient to have somebody else to blame.
Yeah. You know, she'd really felt it was the right thing to give Hagar to Abraham. She would have had a sense of peace about the whole thing. But obviously she didn't. It was just human will and human planning. And so it continued. Go downhill as, I guess that was Suzanne, famous soap opera. But, you know, it's hard to say. What would you do in that situation? It was a leap of faith. Be waiting 10 years and to be getting that old and all of that kind of stuff.
Goes to show you shouldn't go to Planned Parenthood.
Well, shouldn't go to any human solution.
Yeah, I mean, how quickly we doubt God. I mean,
Yeah.
I did.
But there may have been human solutions in those days because there were all kinds of sorcerers and they did all kinds of things that didn't work. So.
Well, that's true.
But the other thing is that Ishmael would have been a lot older. I think maybe 13 to 15 years older. So he should have been like a guardian to the child, to Isaac. But instead of, there's no way that he should have been picking on him in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he was much older at that point. by the time Isaac was born. But, all of this is speculation, whether they were or weren't. Sure, it was partially in Sarah's thought.
One Bible that, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's not entirely. Go ahead.
One Bible I read said mocking could have been a word in translation that could have been he was playing. Now, that's what one Bible said.
Well, whatever it was, it ticked Sarah off. So we can go to the next, I think.
I thought it was interesting. Martha Wilcox talks about Ishmael in translation, and she talks about that Abraham did not just get rid of him, and that he saw the spiritual fact at hand. I thought it was just really interesting. There's one little part. He said, we, like Abraham, need to recognize that the good in human consciousness has in it the seed, or the substance of things hoped for, and not want to destroy it, but to exchange a material concept of it for a higher, truer sense of the same thing. And then she goes on to address that Christian scientists take the attitude of wanting to just get rid of the material things as matter. But I thought it was interesting that she used him. It's page 355 if anyone's interested in going to look at it as an example.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's what we're going to find here, that as we go on, because we're going to find out what Ishmael became the father of, and Isaac, and so are we done with this question? Thank you, Linda. Okay, Betty?
Did we lose you, Betty?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Number 4, how did God save Hagar and her son?
Well, first of all, what happened to Hagar after this? What did they do to her?
Send her away.
Send her away.
Sent her off with her son.
Send her away.
Yeah, they
send her packing with a few provisions and a bottle of
Bread and
water.
water.
Yep. Sent her out to the wilderness.
And she was afraid, was waiting for the death of her child.
And what did she do?
Pray to God.
She did. And wept.
The child cried. God heard the voice of the lad where he was.
I found that fascinating too, because Ishmael was of an age where he could have taken them through the wilderness, and so it just fascinated me that Hagar had that spirituality to turn to God, and Ishmael just collapsed, and God heard him, but not to the degree that there was a solution as it came from Hagar's prayer.
Well,
this is what makes Hagar, I think, very special. First, she's Egyptian, so she's living with strangers, so to speak. They're not her people. And then too, they banished her to the wilderness. And did Abraham really step in and save her or anything like that? Gosh, if you went to go live with strangers and then they banished you to the wilderness, the reaction to, I would think, from a human point of view, would not be what you read here about Hagar. You'd be angry at those strange people. Now, I don't read this in here.
No, I read that she had...
We need to remember who wrote this. And from what standpoint the writer was viewing everybody.
The writer was what?
Oh, we need to remember the standpoint of the writer of this story. How did the writer view all of these people?
But also, didn't Abraham, he really asked God for every step, and I think he asked God, and God said, well, it's okay, send her off, and I will hear Hagar, and I'm going to take care of him. I think Abram was a loving father, and I think that he wouldn't have sent her off if he didn't know that God would care for her and for Ishmael.
Yeah, that might be fine. I don't want people misunderstand. I was not talking about Abraham. I was talking about Hagar. How was Hagar thinking, you know? And,
I'm sorry.
It's quite amazing how she was thinking. That's all. I think it's just quite amazing.
Yeah, I read she had no stature in the world's terms. She was a slave and she was a woman. And yet, she was a clear object of God's love and promise. And to me, this is one of the most important lessons in all of this, that God loves everyone equally. I mean, in one commentary, I thought it was kind of interesting. It compared Hagar maybe to the Afro-American who gets impregnated by their master and then tossed out, their slaves. And despite all of that cruelty, they still have a direct relationship with the Father who created all.
Have we not all one?
Pardon me? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, have we not all one Father, like the Bible said?
Yes. And we know Ishmael was the father of eventually what? Islam. Mohammed. Islam.
This is so significant because the struggle still goes on today because of, we are better, they're not, all that stuff.
Exactly. And it's becoming, at this time, this fighting is still going on. And in the wilderness, it said that, God told Hagar, what did God say about her son?
He would make a great nation.
Well, also that he was a wild donkey of a man, and that there would always be fighting going on. But I read that was kind of a rough translation of that, and that what was really said to Hagar was that Ishmael would be a free man, like a free Mustang, not like a wild donkey of a man, which gives it a different impression. But in other words, she would give birth to someone who was going to be free and not a slave, as she was. And that gave her great hope. But yes, this is how Islam appeared to get started, and so then Isaac, who is Isaac the father of?
Thank you.
And where did that lead us?
Joseph.
12 tribes of Israel.
Well,
Joseph was the son of just one of the wives. And
yes.
That's why he was out of favor, because he was the youngest and there was the other brothers. Mm-hmm. But Joseph was the one that saved them all.
But wasn't that a case again where Joseph was the son of the primary wife?
Yes. The beloved wife.
Who was barren.
Yes, who was
right.
barren. Yeah.
What this tells me is that there's hope for everybody.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. That is the moral of this story. Everyone And that was what Linda quoted. So we see the good in all people, all races. You know, I was so touched by, and I meant to mention it last week, it was what Shahida wrote on the forum, that her background wasn't Christian. And yet that, you know, she is a Christian. She can be accepted, of course, as a Christian. It doesn't matter. And all this talk about chosen people, I mean, what is that? That's like, you're asking for it. I'm chosen and you're not. I mean, that never says that.
I'm sure we
Jesus took care of that too by telling them they weren't chosen because they weren't living like Abraham.
Exactly, yes. Yes.
It's even more ridiculous when you're not living like it and say you're chosen. I mean,
you know, and all this quarreling that's going on.
That's another issue that Mary Baker Eddy cleared up, because in her childhood days, the religious belief that some were already sentenced to hell no matter how they lived or who they were, and that there was a select few that were going to make it.
Exactly, yes.
And she refused to accept that, and that's why she didn't become a member. She wasn't accepted as a member of her father's church.
And that isn't Christianity that's speaking on that part. That's the Christians telling you you're going to go to hell if you're not what I am, the kind of Christian I am.
But isn't that what humans, we as a human race always have, that we always think ourselves superior to this one, to that one, to my neighbor, to the one living down the block, because I'm doing things differently or I feel that way. I think it's a very common thread in human nature to feel superior to other people. It's wrong, but it's something that we'll have to work on.
It's wrong, and it will never be right. That's all.
Mm-hmm. You should always ask yourself, did God say that?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. That's why prejudice of all kinds is evil. It's so evil.
Yes.
And it exists everywhere. It exists everywhere, but
it's also educated. People are educated. Children are not naturally prejudiced. You put a group of children together, all colors, types, forms, everybody's having a good time.
They don't even see it.
Beautiful to watch.
It is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So
often the parents are the ones that make them prejudiced.
Exactly.
Say you're better than so-and-so because.
And all of it is a crock of you know what. And that's what this lesson is telling us. We're all God's children. But
all the one idea of the one mind.
Yes, that's the ultimate truth. But as was brought out in last week's story, it is what? Based on what?
Under Christ, under Christ, living Christ,
under
Christ-like.
It is the Christ, living the Christ. Because if you are obeying the Sermon on the Mount, even the Ten Commandments, you're not going to commit genocide to somebody who's not of your race or color or whatever. You just won't do that, will you? No. So, and I've mentioned this, but I'm going to say it again. It's the Ben-Hur, the first few chapters of it. It talks about the three wise men being called to come to the manger. One was Hindu, one was Egyptian, one was Greek. And it goes into their proud ancestry, how proud they were of their backgrounds and all that. But they were all seeking the Christ. And they came together from different parts of the country. The one Egyptian knew they were coming. He was looking for them. He was searching, and he would see, first the Hindu, then the Greek. They got together, and then they, on their camels, they made the long journey to the Christ. It's a beautiful story. I've read it I don't know how many times, because to me it imbibes that spirit of us all being one. They all heard that calling. they're all receptive to the Christ, whatever your background is. And once you find it,
nobody can ever take it from you.
no.
That's right. Because it's not given by the world. It's given by God.
It is. Thank you. And it just thrills me to know this, to see it, to feel it. There should be not a spark of prejudice in anyone who calls themselves a scientist.
And if that is in our watches and in our hearts, we can heal this world. Because it's the truth. And that's the only thing that will heal.
In Eustace, he says, Christian Science represents spiritual Abraham, in whose seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. It is the destroyer of all materialism through the understanding of spirit as all in all. So by knowing that, we can put an end to all of this fighting that's gone on for centuries over a human concept of race, creation, all human, has nothing to do with God. It's a beautiful story that Hagar, here Hagar was praying, she was a slave, she was Egyptian, she was a woman. God loved her and heard her prayer.
And she recognized that. There was this one verse, the first time she ran away. She says, Thou God seest me. Or she said, Have I also looked after him that seest me? And I just thought that was so beautiful. She recognized who it was and that he saw her.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what did Mike say? Mike said, there's hope for us all. Sit up there. There's hope for us all.
These questions were so beautifully and speculative, it made me keep speculating. And I was kind of wondering if Mary Baker Eddy had been a boy, if her father would have embraced her views on religion at that point versus opposing them.
Right.
Yeah, question.
Made a difference. And I've heard people say, they reject Christian Science on the basis that it was founded by a woman. But that's impossible. A woman couldn't possibly do that.
Yeah.
That's very weird. Thank God we're so far past a lot of the prejudices. And we are, thank God. And anyone who says we aren't doesn't know what's happening, because we are. We couldn't help but be. And a lot of it was accelerated by Christian Science.
A good session.
Thank you.
Good
very,
question.
very timely, excellent, and it's a beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right on time.
Right on time. Yes, it is.
Well,
Thank you, everybody.
everybody
Thank
have
you,
a
Jeff.
wonderful day.
Yeah.
All right.
Glad you joined us. Have a wonderful
Bye-bye.
day. Bye-bye.